Well, I think everybody is here, so we will begin. Hehanewashte, good morning. I am Senator Mary Kunesh, descendant of the Standing Rock Nation. We really appreciate you being here today. It probably feels a little odd after a whole year of none of this, and then to have this opportunity. So we appreciate that you're joining us here. And so we are here to update folks and address the historic violence and tragedies of our American Indian communities, once again, specifically around the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force and the tragedies of our communities, specifically Native American. So back in 2019, we passed the task force to create a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, and that was created through a unanimous bipartisan support of the Minnesota legislature, coordinated by the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Wild research that was led by Nicole Martin also conducted the considerable research in supporting the task force and was able to compile data to create probably the most comprehensive report in the nation and give us a snapshot picture of what's been going on in our Native communities here in Minnesota. But the research actually confirmed our suspicions that Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people are far more likely to experience violence, be murdered, or go missing compared to any other demographic group here in Minnesota. And so we had a very short amount of time, 18 months within this pandemic's time, to put this report together. We went out into communities prior to the pandemic, and when we weren't able to, we made sure that there was access to the ability to send us testimony through email, through phone calls, through Zoom conversations. And within that 18 months, we were able to focus on those issues and put together probably, again, the most comprehensive report in the nation. And so this completed report was submitted to the legislature in December, and then in person this past January. And it provides the statistics to those in criminal justice system, members of our state government, and the public for their use in analyzing the missing and murdered Indigenous women's injustices. And what we were really hoping and pleased to do is that we identified root causes that really contribute to the historic trauma, and those are colonization, racism, sexual objectification of Indigenous women and girls. And then we put it into this really great report and put together our key findings as well as some mandates and recommendations, but they're not limited to a need for a statewide protocol for investigations that include our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, boys, and Two-Spirits. We want to ensure that rural and tribal law enforcement have the adequate resources and training that they need to conduct the investigations. And we put together 20 mandates that we feel needs to be done to continue this important and really groundbreaking work. And the very first one will be the creation of a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Office, and ensure that we have the adequate funding and resources to continue this research into the systemic racism. We want to make sure that we are looking and focusing on eliminating poverty and meeting the basic needs of our community members. And within this MMIR office, we are hoping to create a dashboard that will provide transparency to the public, to the tribes, to different agencies, that will provide information and resources to continue the work that we need to do, and also to ensure that the information that we are gathering is put into a database that is shareable across agencies, across commissions, perhaps across states nationally, so that other organizations or states that are working on this issue are able to also participate in a really good way. And so you'll see behind me a plethora of folks that are engaged and invested in this project, in this movement of addressing the missing and murdered Indigenous community members. And so I would like to invite next Nicole Matthews. Nicole is the co-chair of the task force. And one thing to mention is Monday is our last committee meeting, our full committee meeting, that will bring an end to the missing and murdered Indigenous task force here in Minnesota, but it doesn't mean that our work is over. And so I would like to welcome Nicole Matthews to speak.
Thank you.
Whoa, sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Bonjour. Manidu Beneshiko Indigenous Migisin Dodame. My name is Nicole Matthews. I'm Anishinaabe from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe. I'm the executive director of the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition, and I'm honored to serve as the vice chair of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. The work of the MMIW Task Force has been a critical step in Minnesota in understanding this issue. This work was done in partnership with advocates, legislators, tribal nations, and included multiple systems providers who care about and respond to this issue every day. Like the senator said, the root causes of this violence include colonization, racism, and the sexual objectification of Indigenous women and girls. Through the work of the task force, we learned some heartbreaking statistics. In Minnesota, Native women and girls represent just 1% of our state's population, yet we represent 8% of the murdered women and girls. In addition, from 2012 to 2020, in any given month, there were anywhere from 27 to 54 Native women and girls who were missing. The task force work included data collection, holding community listening sessions, conducting stakeholder interviews, and participating in numerous committee and full task force meetings to discuss mandates and next steps. We most recently developed a strategic plan to ensure that these efforts will continue to move forward, and each person on that task force is deeply committed to this issue and is working within their respective community and professions to address this problem. The report details many mandates, including the creation of an MMIR office who will prepare an annual report and dashboard on this issue and track changes over time. Also important to this issue is supporting tribes to exercise their sovereignty and increase their jurisdictional authority to investigate, prosecute, and sentence perpetrators of violence against Indigenous women. Already this year, we lost Nada Frank, who was murdered last month in Brooklyn Park. In 2016, we lost two of our sisters, Rose Downwind, who was missing and found murdered by her partner, and Tanya Skinaway Sam, who was murdered by her partner and left on the side of the road. In 2018, we lost Lene Strong, who was murdered right here in St. Paul. These are only some of the names, and sadly there are many others. Each of these numbers represents a person, a mother who will never come home to hug her children, a daughter who leaves a hole in her mother's heart, a relative who we will never forget. As an Indigenous woman, mother, and grandmother, this is about so much more than just another report or another task force. The report and the work from this task force tells the stories of real people, our relatives, our daughters, our sisters, our aunties, and our two-spirit relatives. As we prepare to host the last official meeting of the MMIW task force, I urge our policymakers and legislators to pass the critical legislation to create an MMIR office in Minnesota and send a clear message that they care about and are committed to protecting the lives of the people on whose land we all stand. I am now honored to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan.
Well, good morning, everybody. Bonjour. I'm glad to be able to speak to you today and to do so from this room for the first time in a long time. But before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge the 1,323 children who have been recovered It's part of the residential school system in Canada. We have a lot of work to do across North America and also here in Minnesota to acknowledge the deep trauma and pain caused by the boarding schools and know that the issue of our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives is absolutely connected. I'm honored to be here today to highlight the work of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Task Force and what they've done to bring continued awareness and attention to the crisis of Native women and our Two-Spirit relatives who've gone missing and who are being murdered at disproportionate rates. As a Native woman raising a Native daughter, this issue couldn't hit closer to home for me. And last night, I slept in the same bed as my daughter and snuggled her in close, as many of us are acknowledging the trauma, the continued and ongoing trauma of this discovery of these children, but also this issue today. The protection and safety of our Native mothers, sisters, daughters, and Two-Spirit relatives is the building block for the thriving and healthy communities that we deserve. Every person in Minnesota deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and protected, no matter who they are. It's why the governor and I supported the Missing and Murdered Relatives Office in our budget and will continue to push for it. The work of the task force is 15 months of this incredible work and the task force report that has been released. The report confirmed what many of us already knew and what many of us in the community have lived. But this time we have the data, the statistics, and more, because we measure what we care about and we invest in what we measure. As Nicole shared, in Minnesota, Native people make up less than 1% of the population, yet Native women and girls represent 8% of the homicide cases. In any given month between 2012 and 2020, anywhere from 27 to 54 Native women and girls went missing every single month. Every Native woman I know has experienced violence. Every single one. And what the report also provided was community and expert-driven recommendations for solutions. And we know that there is so much more that we've left to do, but all we have to do is listen to community. We proposed the $500,000 to establish a permanent MMIR office in the Department of Public Safety that Senator Kunesh outlined what that work would entail. And additionally, we proposed $2.5 million to support the Office of Justice Programs sex trafficking grants and $10 million for grants for additional crime victim and survivor resources to stop the cycle of violence. We continue to determine the best way to move these proposals forward in real time as we are in negotiations at this moment. But regardless, we will continue to fight for the protection of our daughters and our relatives and advocate for the justice our survivors and communities deserve. I want to sincerely thank Senator Kunesh for the extensive work and advocacy she has done to begin this process of healing for our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And now, along with Representative Becker Finn and Representative Heather Keeler, the Native Caucus, I am hopeful that we can pass a budget that will include the critical investments for this office and all of the work that is needed here in Minnesota. And when we pass this task force legislation into law, it passed with strong bipartisan support. I would like to thank Senator Gazelka for his leadership and for seeing this issue through and providing the action that it needs and deserves. I'd also like to share a special shout out to Nigel Perot and the team at DPS and the MMIW Task Force steering team and every member of the task force, formal and informal. Nigel and the steering team led the work over the last 2 years with grace, intentionality, and care, and we are proud to be partners with them. And lastly, but most importantly, none of the developments would have been possible without the voices of survivors, our elders, and Native communities here in Minnesota. And I want to thank Misty Babineau. Her resiliency and her bravery is admirable. And while we shouldn't have to relive our trauma in order to take action, she shared her story and educated decision makers. She is always on the front lines for our people, and she got it done. For Native people who've been living in this world of fear, we all know that this isn't something that can just be fixed overnight. Healing and justice takes time, but the work happening is well overdue and a step in the right direction in ensuring all of our people are safe. While they aren't here today, community set up hundreds of little red dresses across the lawn last month. The sea of red making it impossible to look away. I will never forget that image or the power of standing next to Native legislators and advocates, speaking on our own behalf, asking people to listen. And I know that in this moment in Minnesota, we are at a reckoning. And I know that we can have healing and accountability simultaneously. So Chi-miigwech for having me today. It is now my honor to introduce my friend and ally in the legislature, Senator Torres Ray.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thanks to all of you, but thank you. Thank you for bringing us together and for doing this work and for being relentless. I started this work with Representative Kunesh-Podein, my partner, and now we're in the Senate together, so watch out. It is such an honor for me to be here and to really let you know that my roots are in this work. And when I think about the work that the task force did for 15 months, I'm just thinking about the 50 years of work of Native women who have been working in child welfare, preventing the separation of children from their families, from whom I learned. Some of them have passed away, some of them continue to work. They are in their 80s, continue to fight on behalf of Indigenous women around the country, and particularly in this state. It has been my honor as an immigrant woman to be mentored and to be trained on policy issues and to be working here with these amazing leaders. So all I have to say is that you are not alone and that this coalition of support is expanding because this work did not start with the task force and it will not end with the task force. 27% of Native people live in poverty today. They are the largest group in out-of-home placement today. They are victims not only of these crimes, but they are also victims of a system that is not paying attention to their basic needs. I will continue to do my work, and I would like to continue to tell you that this will be one of my top priorities. It has been for the last few years of my career, and especially here in the legislature as a senator, but it will continue to be for as long as I am here or wherever I go. Thank you for what you have accomplished, what you have taught us, for sharing your stories. I have to tell you that in my work with Senator Limmer when we passed this bill, and the Lieutenant Governor is correct, this has bipartisan support. I was in his office many, many times. Unfortunately, I have not had hearings on many of my bills in the last few years. I'm a minority in the Senate. So I was in his office almost every day saying, I only want one bill. I only want this bill. So interestingly enough, we're partners with Senator Kunesh-Podein on two issues that I have fought for, which is the Teachers of Color bill, which is going to become law this year. I have worked on that for 7 years. And this has really been one of my top priorities. So I am honored to share this moment with you. And again, making a commitment that this work is just the beginning. Thank you.
Jamie Becker-Finn. I am the chair of the House Judiciary Committee.
and the only Indigenous chair in our legislature. And I will be quick because I have a bill to wrap up today. But I did think it was important to recognize I am very hopeful that this will be in the final agreement. We have had very productive conversations, and I want to thank the Senate and everybody who's been on the working group in really making this a priority and listening, because we have an opportunity this year to continue this work forward, and it really would be untenable to have gotten this far and then to not take that next step. And I know that Minnesotans are ready for us to take that next step. I think that overwhelmingly most legislators are ready to take that next step, and so I do remain hopeful that we will be able to move this forward, and we'll be voting on this as part of an omnibus bill in the coming days. I do think it has struck me as we have had these budget negotiations how important it is that people like myself and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and Representative Keeler and Senator Kunish are here, because I am at that table as we're debating what is in that bill and as we're negotiating and making sure that these priorities remain our top priorities. And so I want to thank Senator Kunish and others who have gotten it this far, and commit to really everybody in our state, and especially our Indigenous relatives in this state, that we will commit to getting this done and taking the next step. So thank you very much, Chi-miigwech.
They told me to bring Kleenex. I probably should have done that. My name is Heather Keeler, representative for District 4A. I stand in front of you unapologetically Indigenous, as I do every single day. I'm a proud enrolled member of the Yankton Nation, which is the Yankton Sioux tribe down in South Dakota with lineage to Eastern Shoshone on the Wind River Reservation. I'm the newest person to this party and effort. As a legislator, but I've done a lot of work in the grassroots area, and so these stories are real. They're some of the hardest stories to hear, but what an Unchi told me one time is that we have to take our pain and turn it into passion, and I feel like these women that I stand with up here have done that. We're doing this work through a very passionate lens. Historically, we have been told that we're disposable. And we're seeing that happen as we uncover the many graves of our babies across Turtle Island. And I am here because it is important that we send the message to our next generations that we see you, we care about you, we value you, and we will look for you. Like many have said, data tells a story of the things that we care about. We have not had a database to share this story. And so I really hope that we move forward collectively and together to share the message to our next generations that you matter. As a mom and as a future Unchi, it really matters that our kids know that they're valued on the land in which we're standing on. This is Turtle Island. We are here together, we're here collectively, and the message is that we care and we will not give up on this work. Pila.
At this time, we would like to invite County Sheriff Luke Hennon to make a statement.
Good afternoon. Luke Hennon, Hennen, Scott County Sheriff. I served on the board representing the 87 sheriffs across our state, and in law enforcement in general, the other law enforcement officers and departments that were part of this task force. We're just proud to be invited to be at the table to have these important conversations. And really the message is law enforcement wants better outcomes for victims and survivors across our state. So we're very honored to be part of this conversation and to be part of the process, and look forward to the MMIW strategies being implemented in the future. Thank you.
Bonnie Claremont, would you like to make a statement?
Good morning. I think it's still morning. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank the Creator for bringing us all together, and for this day, for the report, and for so many things. But I want to also thank Senator Kunish, Nicole Matthews, for your leadership on the task force. Thank all the members of the task force, all our allies, all those in positions that can influence and move forward our voices and the things that our relatives need. And I really I feel so grateful for this report and all of the recommendations and the demands that were made within the report. And coming from a grandmother, I'm a great-grandmother. I've lived in the Twin City American Indian community for over 60 years. And I've worked as an advocate for probably half of that. And I've seen so many changes, but this is one thing that's been a problem ever since I can remember, where our relatives are found murdered, are found deceased, most of them being women. Our children lost to the system, our children placed in foster homes, away from their families, away from their relatives. They go on the run and difficult to find if they're even found. My family, my partner and I did foster care for well over 10 years here in Ramsey County. And we took in adolescents, Native youth, and most of them were runners. And I found myself roaming the streets, literally roaming the streets to find them. And I would always tell them that, if you go on the run, I'm gonna look for you and I won't stop till I find you. And I still feel that way. In my work as an advocate, we have to be able to account for our relatives. We have to be able to find them and help those relatives that are back home looking for them, because they have no resources. They have very little resources. But yet, as Native people, we're so resilient. We could stretch our resources as needed, but yet our relatives need help. Our relatives looking for their family members, not knowing if they're alive, need help. I've seen grandmothers standing on the side of the road with the sign with the picture of their granddaughter saying, "Have you seen my granddaughter?" We need to help them. They can't just be a number, right? Data is so important, but we can't lose sight of who they are, the humanity of who they are. So I think about my own grandchildren. I have many, biological and otherwise. And I think about them out there and how vulnerable they are to all of the problems that exist in our society, the homelessness, the poverty, the drug trafficking. We need to hold our drug traffickers accountable because it's starting to be a problem. So we need to stop blaming the victims. We need to look at what's at the heart of the problem. You know, what's the systemic problem here that we need to tackle and resolve, right? So I fully support the need for a central office to address MMIR. It's so needed. And I'm so thankful that there's funding proposed for the advocates that work for victims. It's sorely needed. As an advocate, I know the awesome work that's being done in our tribal communities. So I'm just here to lend my support and to thank you all for being here, and thank members of the task force and all the good work that's being done in Indian country and especially in Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Next, we will hear from Misty Babineau.
Hello. I spent the last few days trying to find the words to say. I've just been finding tears. I'm angry and I am grieving. The last few weeks have been nothing but numbers and statistics. Hundreds and hundreds of babies found buried at institutions dubbed as schools. And for those of you who aren't Indigenous, I want you to imagine what that would be like. I want you to imagine opening up the paper and reading that your local elementary school, they found hundreds of babies there. What would that outrage be? What would you seek? And then I want you to multiply that on a national scale and a continental scale. Minnesota had 16 of those concentration camps. That's what they are. They weren't boarding schools. And I just think about all those babies who never got to come home. All those mamas And I'm also humbled. And this is where I cry tears of joy, actually, because we are so resilient. I look behind to my sisters back here, and I just want to acknowledge something that I was told a long time ago, that when the Eagle nations and the Condor nations fly together, that's when we're going to bring great peace and healing upon this world. And Senator Kunish and Senator Torres Ray started that work here. And that was due to decades and decades of on-the-ground work that was done by community members and advocates in our community. So I wanted to take a moment to honor all of you, grandmas and aunties who came before us, who gave me the strength and the space to start my healing journey and to be able to use my healing journey as a way to hopefully find justice and peace for the rest of my family and my community, my people, because that's all I'm doing this for. And we told you that this was happening, and we weren't believed. And now you have the numbers. We deserve healing. We deserve peace. And we know what that looks like, and we know what we need. So I'm begging you to provide us with the opportunity to make that happen. Thank you.
Anin, my Anishinaabe name is Nagamos Zibi Unse Kwe. My English name is Chris Stark. I'm honored to be here. Aminu Gijigad, it's a good day. And this is going to be hard. I'm a survivor of all sorts of things growing up here in Minnesota as a child. But the hard part is what we're talking about with the babies who have gone missing over the years. And with a 92% drop in population in the Indigenous community, all Indigenous people alive today, we have generations behind us of MMIR. And we carry that with us. And advocates in the Native community who have talked to so many women, men, children over the decades doing this work, laying the groundwork, so that we can be standing up here saying that we need an MMIR office in order to bring justice, bring healing, bring peace to our communities, to prevent injustices going forward, but also backwards. I've been told that when we do our healing now, we are also helping to heal our ancestors who went before us. And they're also in need of healing. They're in need of justice. And many of them disappeared, and we don't know their names, and we don't know where they are. And the work that we're doing now and the work that we'll do with this office is going to bring peace and justice and healing to all of us. I want to say one thing about some women that I spoke with who were trafficked on the ships in the Duluth Harbor for decades. And one of them was close to 60, and she was living in transitional housing in the city of Duluth. And I conducted my interview with her. I talked with her, and at the end, she started crying, and she said it was hell. She said being out on those ships was hell. And she cried, and then she asked me, please, just get us a table so we can put some pamphlets on that table and a room so that we can come together and talk, because every day I wake up depressed. Every day I wake up wishing I wasn't here anymore. So on her behalf and on so many other Native women, children, Two-Spirit, men, please pass this bill. It's far past time. We need it now. Miigwech.
Representative Barb Haley from Red Wing. I represent the Prairie Island Indian community, and I was born and raised in Red Wing, and so have been around friends of that community my entire life. I came into the legislature with Senator Kunish. We were freshman roommates in our orientation. So honored to have been asked to represent my caucus as part of this work, and thank you, Senator Torres Ray, as well. Good policy doesn't happen easily, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes people to step up and fight through the slog, and that's what these women have done with all these meetings, especially complicated because of COVID and Zoom and people being remote. So I thank them for their tireless effort and the outstanding report that's been completed, and hope to be able to move this forward in a bipartisan fashion. And thank you to the advocates and the people who have told their stories. I'm certainly an outsider to that life experience, but it is painful to hear, and we should all be concerned about it. The recent PBS story on the schools, just coincidentally, a high school student that I know was a student at St. Ben's was part of that research study, so I've kind of been watching her work and watching that report. So thank you again for all of your hard work, and I support your efforts to get this passed. Thank you.
So that concludes this part of our meeting here today, our press conference. I want to thank all of you that came here today to once again share your dedication to this issue, as well as your continuing support of the legislation that we hope to pass before Monday. And really want to express my appreciation for all the members of this task force. It may end officially on Monday at noon, but we will continue the work, and so many of them have also promised and are dedicated to continuing the work, whether we create this office or not. We can't say enough Pilamia, Wopalatanka, Chimigwich to those that step forward, such as our survivors and family members of lost ones who have told their stories again and again. No matter how hard it was, how painful it was, they were determined to not let their pain sit in silence, but to act as a momentum or a propellant to continue the work to address these historic violences and atrocities against our Native Americans. The boarding schools, the missing and murdered Indigenous folks are not just the only issues we're working on, but as Representative Haley said, this legislation will take time, but we are all dedicated and determined to bring justice to our Native families, because we know that when we do that for our families, it only will help those others that are going through that. And so I'll give Nicole Matthews one more minute, and then if there are questions, we're happy to stay for those.
I didn't know that was happening. I just want to say, again, that we really need this office, and we are all committed to ensuring that this work continues. Years ago, 10 years ago this year, we released our Garden of Truth report on the prostitution and trafficking of Native women and girls in Minnesota. And one of the things that one of the sex buyers said to a woman was, "I thought we killed all of you." And that is the violence that we are faced with on the streets every day. And that is what we're talking about today. And we have seen many more women since 10 years ago when we released that report that have gone missing, that have been murdered. And so it's time to continue this work. It's time for Minnesota to keep showing up and to show that this really matters. Thank you.
Are there any questions at this time?
I assume this is more of a policy dispute than a money dispute, because it seems like we should have money for this,
The funding is included in the governor's budget. It was included in the House budget. It's just held up in the Senate. We need to get that agreement with our Senate partners, but we're very optimistic. Yep.
What's the holdup?
We just need the agreement and the buy-in from our Senate members. So Senator Lemmer and Senator Gazelka. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a hearing on this creation of the MMIR office, though we did have informal conversations in committee. And so at the end of the day, we're hoping that they will include that in our public safety omnibus bill.
I guess because there was such strong bipartisan support for the task force, and so, and not that you can speak for your Republican colleagues, of course, I'm just surprised that $500,000 in the grand scheme of a DPS budget is not that much money.
Right. I would agree with you, but it is creating a new office within government, which is not always something that our Republican counterparts like to be able to do. And, we started out negotiations not even knowing what targets were. And once those targets were presented to us, I think there was understanding that there could be some room for that. But, as we go into negotiations, things that are really important to people or hot topics are also negotiating pieces. So we don't want to, once again, become negotiating issues, but I think that is part of it.
Could you walk us through, or any one of you walk us through the difference between the office that you would like versus the Operation Lady Justice regional offices that the feds have set up?
Sure. So the office, the Lady Justice office it was physically set up here in Minnesota, and there was one person that was assigned to that position. We had minimal communication and actually no interaction with that person. I don't know if that office actually exists to this day. But at the federal level, the new administration has been reaching out to parties that are working on these issues and holding national hearing sessions specifically around unique topics. And so I know that under the leadership of Deb Haaland, that she has certainly decided that this is going to be a priority and she will continue the work. And I think they're just at the federal level trying to figure out how to incorporate all the different pieces from all the different states into this and find a way that we're going to be able to work together.
Can I say a couple things?
Yep.
I think in addition, the Operation Lady Justice very much focused on federal systems and the federal system's response. And Minnesota is a public law 280 state. So if we're looking at the response to this issue within our tribal nations, we have to look at both the federal and the state response. And in addition, this office here in Minnesota will address the urban Indian population and be able to address those of us who are not living in our tribal communities.
Which is 70% of us.
Right. 70%. Which is the majority of us, yes.
Perhaps a question for Senator Kunish or Torres, right? Like you said, the issues that lawmakers are very passionate about can be used as bargaining chips. And as we're talking about the objectification of Native women, can you reflect on the fact that this is perhaps being used as a bargaining chip?
That's like really an emotional question because, because that's the way it's been all along historically. The government will give and take, and they'll use that carrot in front of the tribes in order to manipulate either land ownership or water rights or tribal agreements that they never intend to keep. And so when we see things like that happening, where in the past we've had 100% support, especially after hearing the stories that we can't ever forget, and then to bring this piece of legislation forward that would continue that incredible work that we've already started, that we know is not finished, and that there is so much to do. Yeah, it's not only hurtful, but it's also disrespectful to the communities. And so while I can't confirm that this has become a bargaining chip within this, the fact that we haven't come to an agreement, that we didn't get a hearing for it, just sort of leaves me to believe that this was something that maybe they were holding back in order to do a little bit of legislative swapping with. But that's politics, that's the legislature, so.
Sorry for the little question.
Yeah. Any other questions?
All right.
All right, well, thank you very much.